Great, thank you, Elois, and I want to welcome everyone to this American Library Association webinar, Responding Online to the 2020 Census, What Libraries Need to Know. And I am Karen Brown, and I'll be moderating the webinar. I've been fortunate to be working with ALA on some of its census awareness and engagement activities. And actually, my other hat is as a faculty member at the School of Information Studies at Dominican University, just outside of Chicago. Before I introduce the other 5 presenters, I do want to just kind of reinforce, repeat what Elois said, that we are recording this webinar, and in a few days you should be getting a link to the recording as well as a PDF of the PowerPoint slides that we'll be showing. So let me go ahead now and introduce the 5 presenters for this webinar and give you a snapshot of what we'll be covering in the program. First, Gavin Baker. He's Deputy Director, Public Policy and Government Relations at ALA, and he's going to provide an overview of the 2020 census and highlight some roles for libraries. Next, Erika Becker Medina, who is Chief of the Decennial Communications Coordination Office for the U.S. Census Bureau, will walk us through the census response option with a particular focus on the online response option. And a number of libraries have been engaged in preparing for the census, and we're fortunate to have 3 librarians here to talk about what their libraries are doing. First, we're going to be hearing from Jenny Garmon, who is the Legal and Government Information Specialist and a member of the Community Reference Team at Kansas City Public Library. And she'll be joined in her discussion with Cindy Hohl, who is the Director of Branch Operations at Kansas City Public Library. And also have Cecilia Tovar, who is Principal Librarian and Branch and Public Services, at Santa Monica Public Library, and she'll be talking about some of the preparations that her library has been involved in. Finally, we want to be sure and leave time for your questions and comments. So again, do type them into the chat box, and I'll be working with Elois and others to capture them. But we've also set aside some time at the end of the webinar to respond to questions. So at this point, Gavin, I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Thanks so much, Karen. Thanks to Elois and all of our panelists today, and to all of you for attending. And Karen, can I have the next slide, please? So, as Karen mentioned, my name is Gavin Baker, and I am in the Public Policy and Advocacy Office at the American Library Association, and I have been helping to lead our preparations for the 2020 census and our efforts to produce resources that can support libraries. So I will mention this again in a moment, but we have a lot of resources for you that are available for free. You don't even have to be a member, although of course we do appreciate that, at ala.org/census. Could I have the next slide, please? So the census is coming very soon. Just a few words about the timeline here, and how timely our conversation is today, and really puts a lot of urgency for you and your colleagues who may need to know now is the time to start getting prepared, because after March 12th, mailings from the Census Bureau will begin to arrive in mailboxes of households across the country. There will be staggered mailings, and there will be several reminders throughout March and April. So starting after March 12th and continuing on through March and April, libraries are likely to get folks coming in the doors. Sometimes may even have that letter in hand from the Census Bureau and saying, hey, I got this in the mail. Is this real? Do I need to do something about it? Can I get online and use your computers, your internet access to do it here? So we're less than 2 months away from that. And also, for the first time, there will be an option to respond either online, by phone, or by mail to the 2020 census. The online option is new, although everyone will still receive a paper form in the mail if they want one. By mid-April, everyone who has not yet responded to the 2020 census will receive a paper questionnaire and can fill it out on paper and submit it that way if they prefer. And the mailings from the Census Bureau will also have a toll-free phone number that folks can call with questions or to respond by phone if they would like to. And in fact, the online form and those phone hotlines will be available in 13 different languages, so folks can respond in their language of preference. April 1st is known as Census Day. That is the reference day for the 2020 census, so folks can fill it out before or after April 1st, but the form is going to ask as of April 1st who was living at this address. And then by mid-May, the Census Bureau staff will begin knocking on doors, coming to households to visit the folks who have not yet responded to the 2020 census. Even after those visits starts, folks can still respond online, by phone, or by mail with their paper questionnaire if they would prefer. And then by the end of July, the self-response period will wrap up. Could I have the next slide, please, Karen? So we know that libraries across the country are doing a lot to inform their communities about why responding to the 2020 census is easy, safe, and important. It only takes about 10 minutes to fill out the form, and as I said, folks can do it by their choice of online, by phone, or by mail. If you want to do it online, you will be able to do it on a smartphone or a tablet as well, not just a laptop or a desktop. The responses are confidential, they're secure, and they're protected by law. And the results of the census are really important to allocating funding to public services, to ensuring that we have accurate political representation, and to making sure that our businesses and governments and nonprofits have good, accurate data to inform their decision making. Could I have the next slide, please? However, there is a risk that millions of people could be missed in the census, and if they are, their communities will lose out on needed resources. But the good news is that libraries can help. We have a lot of contact with many of the populations that are at the greatest risk of being undercounted, and geographically, 99% of the census tracts that are at the greatest risk of being undercounted have a public library located within 5 miles. So we know that we have many, many potential touch points to help get the word out and to ensure that folks who would like to respond online will have access to the online questionnaire. Next. So in a moment, you will hear from Erika, who will tell you all about the online response form. We do just want to mention quickly, because we've gotten a lot of questions about this, when it comes to what should I do and what should I not do when it comes to the census. There is, by the way, in addition to having the recording of this webinar, also on our website at ala.org/census, we have a link to the guidance from the Census Bureau itself with this advice if you want to have a document that you can refer back to later. But in a nutshell, it is totally okay to let people know, these are the options that you have for responding to the census. If you want to respond online, here's the website. If you want to respond by phone, here are the phone numbers in different languages to be able to call, or when you'll receive a form in the mail, or when you'll receive a visit from a census taker to your house, if that's your preference to respond. By the way, I'm not sure if we officially are have the go-ahead to mention this, but I will share that the online self-response portal is going to be at my2020census.gov. I don't think that website is working yet, so don't go there now. But for you to know, later on where it's going to be located is going to be at my2020census.gov. And the phone numbers also are available for folks. Again, the phone lines are not open yet, but the phone numbers that will be open when the self-response period begins, those also are posted at ala.org/census. Also totally okay, the Census Bureau has a number of resources that they call questionnaire guides. They're both written guides, and there are also a couple of video guides that explain to people how they can fill out the census. The written guides are actually available in 59 languages as well as English. Although as I said, the form itself is only in 13 different languages. But those are really useful resources for folks to use as they are filling out the census, so libraries can definitely share those. And finally, for folks who are using the online self-response form, it's great for library staff to say, here's where the website is, here's how you can change the language if you want, here's how you can navigate between the pages if you want. But our recommendation is, if somebody has questions about the content of the questionnaire, I'm not sure how I should answer their race question. My cousin has been staying in my basement for a couple weeks. I'm not sure if he's really living there. My ex-husband and I share custody of our kids, and I'm not sure whether I should list my kid at my house or at his house. Those kind of questions, it's probably better for the Census Bureau to answer them than for library staff to try to answer them. Not only because the Census Bureau will be trained on the right answers to all those questions, but also because they take an oath for life to protect the confidentiality of those responses. And so if folks have questions about the content as they are responding to the form, our suggestion is to point them to the content, the resources that are available from the Census Bureau, the answers that we have available at ala.org/census, the phone numbers where they can speak to a census taker over the phone and get answers about how they should fill it out. But probably better not to try to help people walk through the form. Of course, if you choose to, you can do that. If somebody asks for your assistance, you can assist them, but don't solicit individuals' responses. Don't go around and tell people, I need you to fill out the census, and I'm going to sit here with you and fill it out for you. Only the Census Bureau should do that. And certainly don't represent yourself as being affiliated with the Census Bureau, because that'll get you into trouble as well. But certainly you can make folks aware of the resources and the assistance that you have available. And as I said, I know that's kind of a lot of information. The recording of this webinar will be posted next week, and we also have a link to the written guidance from the Census Bureau on our website at ala.org/census. And next slide. So that's it. Our resources, they're at ala.org/census. Check out the library's guide to the 2020 census that has all of these resources. Sign up for our free emails to get a notification as our new resources come out. And we encourage you to use our hashtag #CountOnLibraries when you share your story on social media. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Gavin. And we are, Lara Clark, who's with Public Library Association, and I are capturing the questions. I'm going to turn the mic over to Erika. And Erika, maybe in your comments, but a couple of questions came up about mailings to rural areas where there are P.O. boxes. Also, what the hours of operation will be. I think those are most pertinent if you can respond to those as you move into your presentation. So Erika, just remember you are unmuted, so great.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Karen. And yes, I was trying to follow along the chat box and jot down possible questions, but I think most of these are actually covered in my slides. This is not my first slide. You're on slide 10. Can you? Do you know where the first 9 slides of my deck went? whoever put the slides together chopped off the first 9 slides. You'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, it says slide 10. So we're missing the first half of my presentation.
Let me work on that if you want to just start.
Yeah, it would be great if you could hold it up, because it's a lot of content and I don't want to just skip over all that content.
Okay, this is Eloise. Let me pause the recording till we get this right.
All right. So next slide, please. That's just my title slide. Oh, go back one slide. There we go. So again, this is just kind of the bird's eye view of how we get it done, from establishing where to count to motivating response, because as we know, especially libraries and librarians know, it's all about motivating that response to increase the self-response. Self-response is more accurate and also more cost efficient. But part of the response also includes group quarters. I know that I saw a couple questions pop up there, especially about people experiencing homelessness and college students and how they get counted. And those are part of our group quarters operation. And I will touch on that a bit more throughout this presentation. But it's on this slide so that you can see group quarters is part of our operation, but they are different from households that actually receive the invitations in the mail. And then of course the non-response follow-up phase, which Gavin mentioned, begins May 13th. And we are still hiring now to try to hire up to 500,000 folks to help us get the census done. And then finally, tabulating data and releasing the census results, starting with the counts that we will deliver to the president by December 31st of this year. Next slide, please. So again, my presentation is focusing on response, but we cannot motivate response without reminding everyone that the 2020 census responses are confidential and cannot be shared with anyone, not even immigration or law enforcement agencies or any other government agencies. As employees, we take a lifetime oath to protect the personal information of every respondent, and there are stiff penalties if we violate that law, up to $250,000 and 5 years in prison. And the responses to the 2020 census are secure. No matter how you choose to respond, whether it's online, phone, or by mail, your information remains protected. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of how we invite everyone to respond. I think it visualizes nicely that every household will have the option of responding online, by phone, or by mail, and that nearly every household will receive an invitation to participate in the 2020 census from either a postal worker or a census worker. So I saw that somebody was asking a question about PO boxes. Well, 95% of the households across the nation will receive their invitation in the mail, but almost 5% of these households will receive their census invitation when an actual census taker drops it off around that same time in March and April. And in these areas, the majority of households may not receive mail at their home's physical location, such as households that rely on PO boxes or areas recently affected by natural disasters. And so that's why this graphic kind of visualizes that, that's about 5% of the households across the country. But for the sake and purpose of the people who receive their invitation, it really doesn't matter if they get it in the mail or from a census taker. They have the same options. But the people who get their invitation to participate from a census taker will receive a paper questionnaire up front. There's also a segment of the population, about 1 in 4 of the households who receive it in the mail, that will also get that paper questionnaire up front. And then less than 1% of the households will be counted in person by a census taker instead of being invited to respond on their own. We do this in very remote areas, such as what we just started last week in remote Alaska, where we started in Tuksuk Bay. But this also includes northern Maine and select American Indian areas that have asked to be counted in person. But most of all, like I said, for almost 99% of the households, they're going to receive the materials, and whether it's by mail or in person, I don't think there's a lot of difference there because they have the same options. Next slide, please. So Gavin covered this a bit. This is just a little more detail on what to expect in the mail. So on or between March 12th and 20th, that's when that initial invitation goes out. And again, some households will receive their paper questionnaires in this invitation. Previous slide, please. Thank you. Now I said about a quarter will receive a paper questionnaire up front. It's important to keep in mind that every household that hasn't already responded will receive reminders and a paper questionnaire in April. So again, a quarter of those households will receive it in the first mailing, but everyone who hasn't responded by about, well, as the table shows here, the week of April 8th, will receive a paper questionnaire. So I emphasize this because I want to make sure it's clear that we are not disregarding any digital divide. We're providing as many options as possible to increase participation and self-response. Next slide, please. So responding easier than ever. And I continue to say this, online, by phone, or by mail. Something else that makes it super easy because of this online option is that you can respond anytime, anywhere, and from any device. So the online option means you can do this if you are at the library, or if you're, standing in line at a bank or a grocery store and you have time to kill. Having that online option means you can do it from your smartphone or from a home computer, and anytime if you're doing it online. Now, I heard a question about phones, or I saw a question in the chat box about phones, and both the call centers, meaning the phone response option, and the online option will go live March 12th, coinciding with that first set of mailings. But again, March 12th is when that will go live, and so you will have information closer to that date about the numbers to call. The other benefit about online and phone response is opening this access to people who speak different languages. And so because of this, people can respond in English or in one of the 12 select languages that we're supporting, either online through the online questionnaire or over the phone in the language of their choice. And I'm going to cover what those 12 languages are. Next slide, please. So it sounds like a relatively small number, just a dozen, but in actuality, English plus these 12 languages support 99% of all US households, meaning that these languages plus English cover 99% of the households in the US. And so I've listed the languages here. Next slide, please. Just wanted to highlight that the support for Spanish is somewhat additional because of the magnitude of the number of Spanish speakers in this country. And that's why about 13 million households will actually receive bilingual English-Spanish invitations to participate, roughly 9% of the households. And so in those areas that are receiving a paper questionnaire up front, they'll receive an English-Spanish questionnaire up front, kind of a flip style design. And if they're in an area that's considered needing Spanish assistance, but not getting the paper questionnaire up front, they'll receive the invitations in English and Spanish, but they won't actually get a paper questionnaire until April. But anyway, that's the extra support that Spanish speakers will have than the other languages, is that some areas will receive those invitations in English and Spanish. But what's important to note is that everyone who receives the English mailings will have information in that initial invitation in 12 different languages, the 12 that were in the previous slide, directing people to respond online directly to the link that coincides with that online questionnaire in their language, or by phone directly to someone who speaks that language. And so even for people who are receiving all the, just the English mailings, it's important to know that the English mailings do include those phrases encouraging response in their own language in these 12 different languages. Next slide. So even though I like to emphasize that the 12 languages plus English support 99% of US households, it's important to keep in mind that, as Gavin mentioned, we also have language guides in 59 non-English languages, including the 12 that have the online questionnaire and phone response. And you can already access the language guides on our website, 2020census.gov, in addition to English, to see how they walk through the questionnaire, again, in that language. And so it covers the 59 languages that are listed on this slide. Another thing that's important to note is that glossaries are also available, providing key terminology to bilingual staff. And again, our hiring approach is hyper-local, and we're looking for enumerators and partnership specialists that'll be hired from within their local communities, emphasizing the importance of communicating in local languages. And then last but not least, we're reaching out in these languages. I forgot to mention in the previous slide, not in these 59, but in the 12. We will have advertising in the 12 languages that have the online and phone response. Next slide, please. So I think it's more helpful to provide the link that I've listed below this screenshot of the video language guide, and then each of you can visit this website on your own time to see the video, which is, I believe, about 6 minutes long, that walks through the online response tool. Next slide, please. Now, I think I saw in the chat box that somebody was asking how we count people experiencing homelessness. The 2020 census has procedures that count people outdoors where they receive services, as well as other locations where they're known to sleep. And so when we say outdoor and other locations, the Census Bureau works with local groups to identify these outdoor locations, as well as other locations such as, 24-hour laundromats, casinos, movie theaters. So it's not limited to just the outdoors. But this operation takes place on Census Day, April 1st, 2020. In addition to these locations, the Census Bureau also works with service providers to get a complete and accurate count at their locations between March 30th and April 1st. And these service providers include emergency and transitional shelters, soup kitchens, and regularly scheduled mobile food vans. Before I wrap up, I know I got a question about college students. So the nuance with college students is that if college students live in college or university housing, whether that housing is on the campus itself or sometimes just off campus but still university owned, those students are covered under what I mentioned earlier, the group quarters operation. And we are about to enter that phase of group quarters advanced contact next month, where the Census Bureau will be working with the administrators of all these group quarters, not just colleges and universities, but also nursing homes, military barracks, prisons, a number of facilities where basically people who live in these group facilities are not related to one another. And so that includes colleges and universities. Now, I mentioned there was a nuance, and that is there are students who live off campus or close to campus, but in housing that is not university owned. And there will be what we call early non-response follow-up. I believe April 9th is when we begin that. And that's to try to catch students who haven't already responded on their own before they leave for the end of the semester. Because as we know, oftentimes May 13th, when the rest of the nation will have census takers starting to knock on their doors, we would miss students that have already maybe left because it's the end of the semester. And so that is the nuance that some students, the students who live in housing that is not owned by the university, will receive invitations to respond in the mail, just like a regular household. But the difference is the census takers will actually go to them about a month earlier than the rest of the nation for the non-response follow-up phase. Next slide, please. And so I just put our beautiful brand new website up here, 2020census.gov. Again, this is, I believe it's called mobile optimized. So it's, looks great on the phone, not just on your regular computer screen. And just a wealth of information on this website. And so when people ask like where they can get information, I would always start here, 2020census.gov. I thank you, and I think I'll reserve the rest of my time for questions.
Thank you, Erika. And as I mentioned, we're going to hear from two libraries now about how they're preparing for the census. And I'm going to ask Jenny and Cindy to talk first about what's going on at Kansas City Public Library. I'm going to take just a moment to pull up your slide.
Thanks for joining us on the webinar. I'm Jenny Garmon with the Kansas City Public Library. And I can keep going because I would want to share that we got started pretty early with our Regional Complete Count Committee, our Kansas City Regional Complete Count Committee, and they've been a tremendous help, a tremendous support to us as we've gotten started. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the slides too. And I'll underscore too that 2020census.gov is a wealth of resources, as is ala.org/census. I lean on both websites heavily, working with community partners and working within the library. And so thank you for all of the hard work that goes into making those resources available.
Okay, you should be able to see the slide at this point.
There it is. So the general idea here that Cindy and I want to cover is sort of things that happen inside the library, things that are happening outside the library, and the general timeline that we're working with, which is of course going to mirror the timeline for the census. Starting with inside the library, I really want to focus on sharing that the staff has to be aware of what's going on, when it's happening, and how they can assist. A lot of questions have come in, like, what is my boundary? Like, how can I help and not go over a line? And we work with our Census Bureau partnership specialists and with our Complete Count Committee to share that information. And it's basically exactly what you've heard today of, if someone needs a lot of extra help, they really should be calling on the phone and getting that help over the phone from a Census Bureau employee, or waiting for someone to come visit them at their home. So no surprise that one of my first things I want to talk about is connecting with your Census Bureau partnership specialist, because they are going to be the great way that you can find out what the needs are regarding recruiting Census Bureau employees and also then training them. We have had, I think, since, I'm looking at Cindy, yeah, but I think we've had recruiting sessions here at the library for months now, trying to make sure that people are local who will be knocking on those doors, because that's really important. The opportunity to join as a partner on the 2020census.gov is pretty powerful. In coordination with your Complete Count Committee, this is a great way to get Census Bureau information, Census Bureau stickers. We have buttons that our Regional Complete Count Committee produced, and people love them. But it's also a great reminder of, here's where you can go for information, and here's 1 April 2020, this is happening, this is coming. I did want to highlight too that it's important to reach out to staff internally, but also to other libraries externally, so that we can be a strength for each other. We had a symposium here in September where we invited libraries within a 60-mile radius, all different shapes and sizes. Please come, let's exchange information. take what you need, share what you have, so that again, you just be a strength for each other. We also have, and I'd be happy to share that with anybody who would like it, our website, which has links to the sample questionnaire and a bunch of questions, including how do I identify, how to identify a scam, or I think I already answered the census. And I'd be happy to share that with anybody who would like that. We also have a press release. We have a great media relations specialist, and she drafted up here. If you've never done it before, if you want to get newspapers or news media to one of your events, just to highlight, hey, get the word out, here's how it should look. And so I'm happy to share that also. I'll turn it over to Cindy to talk about what's happening at our branches.
Thank you, Jenny. Hello, everyone. So at the Kansas City Public Library, we have 10 locations in the metro. And what we decided to do was make sure that everyone knows that there is a computer available at all of our locations for them to come in and take the survey. So we have a dedicated computer workstation for each location, where we have set aside a workstation and we have signage around it, so that will help invite patrons over to go ahead and complete the census if they have not done so already. We wanted to make sure that we were ensuring a private experience. So we have purchased privacy screens to go over the front of the monitors to make sure that if anyone is browsing the stacks or what have you right around the computer, that the patron has a private session. On our home screen of all of our computers, we are offering a link to click on that will direct them. It'll launch right to the online response tool for the survey and take them to that website. So that's another way that we can expedite access to the online tool. And at the workstations, we are also offering flyers and information guides, a copy of the paper survey, so that they can review the questions beforehand and they can familiarize themselves with the form so they know what to expect. And we are sharing information with our staff so that everyone can help our patrons navigate through these resources and continue to have them go back to the census.gov website.
Thanks, Cindy. Thanks a lot. I would appreciate, you already read it. I got us to the outside the library part. One of my favorite things to do is go outside the library, bring the library out to the community. We have, our mission is to be a doorway to knowledge for all people in our community. And that means not just the people who come into the library, but the people maybe who are either intimidated or who are just aren't sure they want to come into the library. We'll go out to you, and we'll bring. And I do want to emphasize, this is the privacy screens and what I'm going to talk about coming up here. This came about as a result from a grant that that we received from Greater Kansas City. So I would encourage you to look in your community for organizations, foundations that are offering opportunities for grants to help ensure a complete count. But so part of what we're offering in our community is we'll come out to you with our laptops and with our mobile Wi-Fi from the grant. And we want to make that connection with the community partners ahead of time, understanding what is it that you need, when is going to be a good time for us to be here, what kind of questions might there be, so that we come with the answers or with ways to get to the answers. It's a great way to build relationships and to strengthen relationships that you have. And for me, that's a real joy. It's just something I just really appreciate that. We have a vibrant refugee community here. We have great community partners working with refugees. And I just also wanted to share how great it is that we have the language guides in all of those languages, but within our refugee community, I've been sharing the language template because there is such a language template for the guide so that people who aren't covered by the 59 languages have a resource that they can use in their own language. I really do want to give a shout out to Dallas Public Library too. They have a lot of great ideas, and that's a link just to an article where they talked about that their plans and how every time that they're out in the community, they're going to be bringing the information about the 2020 census with them, and I think that's a great model to follow. I think I'm ready for the next slide. This is just a quick snapshot. There's more things I've added here since I shared the timeline, but this is sort of a sense of we're meeting, having connections with neighborhood associations. We're being there at our Regional Complete Count Committee. We're at different community action networks. The training at MARC. MARC is Mid-America Regional Council, and they are our Kansas City Regional Complete Count Committee. And during the training at MARC, we shared the video that was a walkthrough of how to complete the census for the people, training the people who are going to be there, who are going to help people gain access to the census online, or help them help answer questions about the online or phone option. Paper or phone options too. This is just, and then you'll see the census team meeting on the 4th of February. That's internal here to the library saying, okay, here's what we've got going on. Who haven't we partnered with yet? Where do we need to be? What more could we be doing? And just kind of setting our rhythm for the remainder of the census timeline. And I think it's important to share too, just that it doesn't stop on 1 April. It really does keep going, and I think I saw in here it could even keep going until July, so that we need to be mindful of that and be ready to answer questions from our patrons. Oh, and KIM is Killer Information Meetings. That's another internal staff meeting where the meeting on the 4th is just for folks who have said, yes, I will help with the 2020 census at the library. The Killer Information Meeting is staff-wide, system-wide, and it's just, again, catching up with staff and sharing, here's what's going on, and do you have any questions? I think that's about all I was going to say. Do you have anything else, Cindy? Okay, thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Cindy and Jenny. Great ideas and strategies. So I appreciate that. So moving to the West Coast, we are going to now hear from Cecilia, who's going to tell us a little bit about what's happening at Santa Monica Public Library related to the census. So Cecilia, I'll turn the mic over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm a little bit under the weather, so I apologize if my voice is still doesn't sound right. But I will talk about a little bit what we're doing here in Santa Monica. We actually started getting together last year with the Office of Communication, the City of Santa Monica's Office of Communication, and the library. And we asked our community leaders to come to a meeting and with our representative from the census just to hear how we're going to organize and develop some subcommittees. And I was really impressed to see how much of the community came, and there were leaders from senior facilities, from our affordable housing, the school district, the college, also another Connection for Children, nonprofit organizations. They came together and they formed the subcommittees that it has to do with early literacy task force. It has to do with education, communication. And after coming together at the library, the city of Santa Monica also created a media toolkit for them, using some of the resources that the census offer, and just having a communication and more comprehensive toolkit to make sure that our community is aware about the languages and the timeline, and to answer any questions. So we hosted a few community meetings at the library at different times. Right now, we're in the process of going back and looking at what kind of plans that they have now that we are here in 2020. And I think that it's going to go very well with some of the communications and some of the share resources that they're going to have in order for us to be more strategic, especially to the areas where we know that we have hard to count communities. Inside of the library, we started already with our own trainings and sharing the information that ALA had put together, as well as the California State Library put together a wonderful toolkit, the Census Sensibility. This was part of the leadership challenge that the California libraries, the California by the State Librarian put out. And that's toolkit shows all the information that you want to know in the library in California, and also what kind of programming, what kind of questions, what kind of challenges you might see. And it's a wonderful resource if you want to go to our state library website. And we are sharing this information with the entire staff because we understand that even our library patrons or our as-needed staff that we have, they might be encountered with all these questions. And we're also going to be providing trainings and our all staff meetings, and we make available the rooms about any webinars that we can sign up and then sign up for them and then keep it open for the staff to come in. One area that we are going to be starting pretty soon is actually training our literacy tutors, because I'm pretty sure that they're going to get questions, especially from their clients. And so we're going to be putting together something for them just to answer specific questions. And when they are meeting in the library, how can they help them? And what can they do, the do's and don'ts, like kind of like what Gavin touched on. I think it's very important for us that we do help our staff. And as the number one question I'm getting is that, what about if I don't know the language? How do I'm going to be able to answer specific questions? And I think that sharing the information about the 1-800 number that they can call and direct people to those numbers if they can't get stuck in helping them. We're also going to make all our computers available with the link. We're actually going to put it as part of this screen there, so they can come in and they can fill out their form there. We're also going to dedicate our computer lab. We're going to leave it open for people to use for their census form. And then also we're going to have Chromebooks that we're going to take to all our branches, because although we're going to have our computers there, it's kind of good to have at each of the branches. We have 5 locations, 4 branches in the main library, and we are thinking of dedicating 1 laptop per branch, plus the ones that they have on the floor. Right now, we're at the library, the 3 division managers, which is me, branch of public services, our information management manager, and also reference services. We're all the 3 of us working together. How do we best communicate and train our staff and be available as more information comes in, and how we distribute it online, and as well with any handouts that we can provide to our community and as well our staff. I think it's just going to be a busy, exciting year. And we also have, using the media toolkit that the City of Santa Monica put together, and I will be happy to share that as well if you like. The PDF. We have put together through social media and our website, and schedule it, some tweets and media through the city and also at the library to make sure that we're making everyone aware and excited. Our youth department is coming together to start thinking about what kind of programming can they do, and also get our youth involved and excited about helping us and promoting it, but also learning about why it's so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. We do now we've been getting great questions that have been coming into the chat box. So we want to be able to respond to some of the questions. And so that you do know, the webinar kind of officially ends in about 7 minutes, but we are going to stay in the Zoom room. And if you are available and can stay, we'll try and get to all of the questions that are asked. But I don't know if either Lara or Gavin, if you were capturing some of the questions, or Elois, want to spotlight some. And while the questions are being responded to, I'm going to go ahead and bring up a slide that mentions a couple of the resources that have been talked about: the video guide, the ALA online resources census page, where you can share what you're doing in your library, and then also the URL for the online response form, which we do want to emphasize is not active at this time. So questions that that you want to highlight, either Lara or Gavin.
Karen, it's Lara. I do have a running list. I hope that I've captured everything from the chat. So I know that there were a couple of questions related to the security of submission. I don't know, Erika, if you can talk a little bit about any recommendations related to security in terms of using Wi-Fi or using a public computer in a library or other location.
Yes, thank you for that question. So one thing that's important to emphasize is that when you're on our secure website, you can verify that it's safe by making sure the address begins with HTTPS and includes a lock symbol. If you're visited by a census employee, note that the technology they use has the same strong security controls and is fully compliant with the standards mandated for federal systems.
Thank you. We also had some questions about paper forms. So I just want to confirm, a question about libraries printing forms or making them available for distribution. I understand that's not happening. So I just want to confirm, how will people get paper forms if they prefer to respond by paper?
Yes. Everyone who has not received a paper questionnaire in the initial mailing will receive a paper questionnaire in April 8th, the week of April 8th to be more exact. So again, we realize that, we send paper questionnaires to roughly 1 in 4 households. And again, that's based on our data-driven design using American Community Survey estimates that tell us where people are less likely to respond online. And so for those areas, they will get their paper questionnaire up front. But for everyone else, if that's their preference, they can just wait until mid-April, basically around April 8th, and that's when they will receive a paper questionnaire. It's in the 4th mailing.
Okay. Thank you. And I understand that there'll be a confirmation that folks will get when they submit if they're completing it online.
That's correct.
Can people print that out, that confirmation? Because I understand that it's not the Census Bureau is going to email or send any other confirmation, but if somebody wanted to print that, can they do that?
So I have to admit, I am not the cyber expert here. But based on what I've done on my own, I think, worst case scenario, people can always do a Control P print screen for anything that pops up on their screen.
Okay. What if there are 2 households that are sharing an address? Some 2-family houses don't have apartment numbers for separate units.
Excellent question. Thank you. It's important that whoever fills out the questionnaire fills it out for everyone in the household, regardless of who is related, who isn't, if it's a separate family, it's for the entire household. And this is also important to emphasize because, as many of you are well aware, one of the historically undercounted groups, and it's actually, I believe, the most historically undercounted groups for age demographics is the very young children. So basically, babies up through 5 years old. And that's why there's also messaging in the questionnaire to remind folks that if they're responding, to include those babies or those young children, regardless of whether it's their own children or not, whether they're their own children or not. And so same concept applies throughout, meaning, you know, if you have a second family living in that home, you're responding for that family as well. The flip side of that is that if you're not sure if that head of household, you know, included you in the response, that's the other beauty of the online and phone response options, is that you can still respond. We have self-response quality assurance mechanisms in place to avoid duplicate counts, but to also ensure we get a complete and accurate count.
So that was one of the questions that folks have been posing, is how you control for duplicates. So you're just letting us know that you have systems in place for that.
We have systems and algorithms and processes in place, and we don't share them. We don't even share them with other Census Bureau employees who don't have a work need to know. And we do this because we want to make sure that, you know, we don't release this to any potential bad actors. And so that's why we just tell people, we've got it covered. We've you know, we do this, but we don't actually go into the details of how we ensure that.
Thank you. And do you have a sense from Pat, I don't know, one of the questions was, will somebody be able to get a pretty quick phone response when the CQA lines are open? And I don't know what kind of volume guys expect or would predict, but that's one of the questions. And it sounds like you don't yet know the hours for the phone line, so that's something we're going to get to people. Yes, but when they call, can they get connected fairly quickly?
Yes, and what I can tell you is that for people who don't speak English or Spanish, they will be connected with a live customer service representative from the beginning. But we do have what we call IVR, interactive voice response, for both English and Spanish speakers. That's not the only option, but that allows us to help some people up front before filtering the people that actually need a live person. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And when exactly will the online portal go live? And is it the case that, so kind of the start and the end date in terms of online self-reporting?
Thank you for that, because I forgot to highlight that in my presentation. So both the online as well as the phone response options will go live for the public March 12th, and they will both be up and running through July 31st, meaning through our non-response follow-up phase. So even though non-response follow-up begins May 13th and also goes all the way through July 31st, people can still respond on their own, even during that non-response follow-up phase.
Right.
And paper will be processed through August. And so if somebody holds on to that questionnaire and they choose to mail it, you know, in late July, we'll still process those paper questionnaires up through August.
Great. And can homeless people initiate their response online, or do they need to wait for the service-based enumeration?
So I don't want to discourage anyone from responding online, right? And so I wouldn't say that they cannot do that. You know, they have the option to do that just like everyone else. But we do, you know, work with our partners to ensure that we count people experiencing homelessness, you know, whether that's with their service providers or at outdoor locations or other locations where people are known to sleep. So I realize that's not a very brief response, but basically they should be covered during this operation that will run from March 30th through April 1st. That's the actual like on the ground operation. Obviously we're working with partners before that to, you know, to establish those counts and when we go out. But again, I don't discourage anyone from responding.
And another question related to that would be, what address should a person who is perhaps using the online form and experiencing homelessness, is there an address, like should they use the shelter, or you know, any advice on that? I understand that there's two options here, but any suggestions in terms of that?
I guess they would use where they consider that they spend most of their time.
Okay.
But yeah, we again, we work with service providers to count people at these locations. So at both emergency and transitional shelters, at soup kitchens, and also at regularly scheduled mobile food vans.
Okay. And one of the questions had to do, again, with confidentiality. If law enforcement presents a warrant, will the information be shared in that case?
Absolutely not. Title 13 prohibits that. And so, you know, we've said that, we've been very upfront about that. The Title 13 protects that, and that means that we cannot share the data, not even with law enforcement agencies.
Great. And somebody else, I think, asked about the penalties. Can you tell us what happens if they're, you know, if in terms of any kind of confidentiality issue?
Yes, you mean with Census Bureau employees?
Yes.
Right. So as Census Bureau employees, we take a lifetime oath, and the penalties are up to $250,000 and or 5 years in prison. And so there are stiff penalties in place.
This is Karen. Another question that came in, somebody asked if a person completes the census and they realize they made a mistake, can they go back somehow and correct it?
You mean online? Can they go back and correct it?
It was more general, just if a mistake was made. I think it meant either online or with the paper form.
Well, I think if it's with the paper form, I'm assuming the question means if they've already mailed it.
Exactly.
Right. And so I think if they do that, again, the self-response quality assurance methods that we have in place would then have to decipher which of those responses to take.
Do you know, does one search engine work better than another, like Chrome or Internet Explorer or any of that? Any other advice related to kind of the internet browser, if it makes a difference?
I do not know that. I will have to get back to you.
Okay.
Up to now have not heard us promote one browser over another.
Okay. And I think we have this in the library's guide to the census, but one of the questions that came in is if someone starts the online form and gets interrupted, are they able to log out and start again at another time?
So that's tricky. Let me answer it this way. If they get interrupted and they have to walk away, then when they log back in, they're going to have to start over. That being said, the online response is not rushed, meaning if you need to take your time while you're doing it, it allows for that time. What it doesn't allow for is for people to log out and log back in. And that's because of the cybersecurity measures that are in place and preventing, you know, basically ensuring security of the data. And so that is precisely why we don't let people log out and log back in.
Great.
I believe Jenny Garmon wanted to add another comment. So go ahead, Jenny.
Hi, thanks very much. I appreciate it. I just wanted to follow up with the comment about how one of the most undercounted populations are children 0 to 5. And just a reminder too for me of our time at ALA in June last year when we had a census session, and I believe it was the Annie E. Casey Foundation recommended a book called We Count, and I included it in the slides, and I forgot to mention it, but we're going to be using that during story times and in outreach efforts with community partners to make it real for the children and also very informative for the parents. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an option for libraries to consider. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. I think that touches on most of the things. I don't know if Karen or Gavin are seeing anything else in the chat. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. I think one other question is if the library could link to the 2020 census.gov, which seems okay, and if they should direct people to the My Census page if folks come into the library asking about that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure, there were two. One is where do we direct people online in terms of completing the online census? That's one question.
So we are purposely not pushing people there yet because okay. That information will be in the invitations that go out in mid-March because there's no, it's not live yet. So that's precisely why.
Okay, and libraries can link to the census webpage, right? I see that the online response is there, but the library can provide a link to that once it's live. Is that correct?
Yes, you mean if, like, just to tell people where it is in case they don't have their invitation in hand. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yes, they can do that because the other thing, and I neglected to mention this in my presentation, the nice thing about, online and phone response is that unlike before, you don't actually need your invitation with your census ID. There is an option to respond even if you don't have that pre-assigned, pre-delivered unique census ID.
Great, and it should be, I think the URL that we have on our slide might be missing an S. For anything related to the census, should all of those be HTTPS or does
that would be for a secure connection?
For a secure connection. Okay, so for their online response, there will be an S in there.
That's correct.
Okay. And there was a question about whether or not people living in group quarters answer the census individually or through the administration of the group quarters, specifically related to prisons or detainment centers.
So that depends on the administrator of the group quarter facility. They have multiple options. And actually, before I forget, I always, plug our website, but just last week, we released a helpful fact sheet on counting people experiencing homelessness. And on the second page of that fact sheet, we go into the details of how for service providers, and this is similar for other group quarters, not just for those experiencing homelessness, it's really up to the administrator whether they want to, depending on the situation, whether they want to just provide their own administrative records data or whether they decide to distribute the census questionnaires throughout that facility, or whether they want to be sworn in to take the information themselves and then give it to the census, or whether they want a census person to come and count the people at the facility. So there's really a variety of ways that those group quarters can be counted, but it's determined by the administrator of the facility. Similar to college and university housing, if college students live on campus and they're wondering how they're going to be counted, it really depends on the administrator of their college housing.
And are Peace Corps volunteers counted in the census if they're living overseas?
We have the federally affiliated count overseas, and so that covers a variety of positions, but yes, I don't have all the fine details at the tip of my tongue right now, but I know that they are counted.
Okay, great. Gavin, Karen, anything else you're seeing that I've missed?
There is the question about providing assistance to somebody who may not have reading ability. Am I right that the phone, that they could complete the census through online, through the phone, through a phone completion.
Yes, the phone option would be excellent for that.
And if somebody, and if an enumerator comes to their house, the enumerator can help them with the form, can ask the questions and put them into the electronic device. So in that case, because they've been duly sworn, they can collect the information from somebody at their household.
Absolutely. I probably responded too soon. I was responding thinking of the self-response phase, but definitely once we hit that non-response follow-up phase, the enumerators could definitely compile the information based on the responses that they received to their questions.
Great. Great.
Oh, I see a quick question here that I haven't answered to, where somebody's asking if there's a way to know ahead of time if the people in your zip code will receive the online invitation in the initial mailing or not. And it's on our website. And actually, for this one, it's easier to find it just at the census.gov website. Wait a minute, and I'll give you the census.gov/2020 census. And that gives a lot of, that website also has a lot of resources, but you'll see if you go to census.gov/2020 census that one of the 3 thumbnails kind of in the middle of the page there between the sample questionnaire and our operational plan is the, it actually says the infield address canvassing viewer, but there's another viewer that's also on our website, and it shows the different, it's called the contact strategy. And it shows whether, down to the census tract level, if somebody's going to receive their questionnaire, their paper questionnaire in the first mailing or in the 4th mailing. And it also delineates if they're going to have the English or the bilingual English-Spanish mailing in their census tract.
Somebody asked about who to contact if they have questions after the webinar. So I'm putting up the slide with email contact information.
Great.
And I think I was going to type this in, but one of the questions is about kind of, again, the level of assistance for librarians. So if somebody would like somebody to read the questions on the form or for library staff to enter the information, that might be a case where having them call or having them wait for a census enumerator might make more sense if they're not able to enter the information, if it's a question of literacy or language. Could you give us some counsel on that, Erika?
I'm sorry, you said if the question is about language?
No, if a patron is asking a library staff person, for instance, to read the questions on the paper form or online to them and then ask the library staff to enter the information in the online form for them, is that an instance where it would be better for them to get on the phone or try and see an enumerator in person?
Yes, agreed. I think that if they actually need help filling it out, that would probably be the best solution. But you can also point them to the language guides, if it's a language issue, the language guides and the video guides that would be available.
Yeah. Okay. And you all have our contact information. Every time we do this, the questions are really great, and I do believe, as I think Gavin put in the chat earlier, that many of them are addressed in the library's guide. We've added to our frequently asked questions section, and we have a few more items that will continue to come out as we do this work. So if there's things that we haven't captured, then we'll look to make sure that that's in a future tip sheet, because we do have one coming out related to the online response. So all of your questions and feedback has been really helpful here, and we definitely recommend to you the guide, and you're welcome to reach out to us with additional questions. I don't want to jump in front of you, Karen, or...
No, and I was just going to also mention that all of the resources that we've mentioned, as well as some additional ones, are on the ala.org/census. If you go to that URL, there are a number of different tip sheets, recordings to some earlier webinars that we hosted, the library guide that we've mentioned several times, as well as links to Census Bureau resources and more. So do use that resource as a jumping off place.
Yes, and again, that Mail Contact Strategies Bureau, where I mentioned the map, where people could actually drill down and see, you know, if they're going to get paper in the first mailing or the fourth. That's on our website, and if you go to our website and look for news releases, it was provided in the November 18th news release last year.
Right. And as a reminder, in a few days, you'll be getting a link to this recording of the webinar, as well as a PDF of all of the slides, all of Erika's slides, so, and the others of the other presenters as well.
Thanks everyone for the
Thank
great
you.
questions, and to all of our panelists and for
Yes,
all the
thank you.
folks in our chat. Very helpful to have a team effort. So thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.